This podcast was brought to you by Intertrust, the inventor of digital rights management. Intertrust applies a privacy by design process to all of its products and services, and has a team of leading privacy and security researchers dedicated to bringing innovative technologies into its offerings. Intertrust's DRM solution, ExpressPlay, has strong privacy protections built in from the ground up. Go to intertrust.com for more information.
Welcome to Tech Lightning Rounds. I'm your host, Beth Kindig. This podcast interviews key people with deep expertise on one topic for a 360-degree view. One difference between this podcast and the other podcasts you listen to is that I hold short interviews called Lightning Rounds, with the goal of getting you a lot of compelling information very quickly so you can get on with your day. May 25th, 2019 marks the one-year anniversary of the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, which are regulations enacted by the European Union on data protection and privacy. The GDPR aims to give control to individuals over their personal data and to simplify the regulatory environment for international businesses. The law divided companies into data processors and data controllers, and essentially any company who has customers in the EU must comply. The GDPR sent a shockwave through tech companies who had previously gone unrestrained in data collection. In these lightning rounds, I speak to 3 companies who are going to great lengths to protect your privacy, especially because there is a lot of press around companies who do not follow privacy standards. The focus of this podcast will be on companies that go above and beyond what is required. I speak to the Director of Privacy at Twilio, which is a leader in global communications and uniquely positioned to handle data from text messaging sent inside of applications.
With the recent Facebook Cambridge Analytica issues, I don't think people fathomed that what would happen around, doing a survey, a personality survey, and then them data mining all this information.
I also speak with Tomas Sander of Intertrust, the company that invented digital rights management and has been advocating for privacy for nearly 30 years.
Also, given machine learning and AI algorithms, it is possible to infer now many sensitive attributes about users from these data sets, even when the data sets are seemingly innocent.
And I also speak to Miko, a visionary startup that is introducing the concept of data control for your digital life.
You do a DNA test and you want to explore the genealogy of your family, and you haven't read the fine print that says you're actually signing away the rights of that maybe for 2 or 3 generations in the future.
Twilio provides the messaging, voice, and video inside mobile and web applications for nearly 40,000 companies, such as Uber, Lyft, Yelp, Airbnb, Salesforce, and many more. You can think of Twilio as a telecom in the cloud, which places Twilio in a unique position when it comes to privacy. I had the opportunity to speak to Robin Andrus, Director of Privacy, on how they handle sensitive customer data, including for people who live outside of the European Union. Can you give us a little bit of background as to what your company does?
Sure. So Twilio is one of the leaders in the communications platform as a service space, where we power APIs to help telecommunications services like SMS and texting, for example. A good example is when you order a Lyft or an Uber and you'll text with an Uber driver and you'll notice that's not really their phone number. So that's an example of one of our services.
As a global communications platform, you're in an important role for privacy because your APIs handle calls and texts inside of applications. What is Twilio's stance on privacy?
So Twilio actually has what are called binding corporate rules, which is the global framework around privacy, which is, for anyone who's been in the privacy space for a long time, they know that it's actually very challenging to reach this standard. You need to work with a law firm or consultancy to make sure you're meeting a bar of privacy and actually have your privacy regulations and obligations agreed to and approved by your lead DPA, Data Protection Authority in the EU, of which ours are the Irish DPC. So when my manager came here several years ago, it was during when Safe Harbor was being brought down in 2015, and Twilio has really only been around for 10 years. And she said, I want to do this right. I want to build privacy right from the beginning. And that's why she put binding corporate rules into place. So we treat everyone who uses Twilio services across the board the same, our corporate rules. One rule, we don't have a different one for the US or the EU. So I'd say that they are getting GDPR level privacy standards when you use Twilio.
What are the privacy laws that were passed in California for 2020? Can you give us some background there?
Yes. So there's still some items they're discussing around the law, but it's the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And it's basically a GDPR-ish style law that was passed where either there's certain criteria for whether or not you fall under it. It's mostly more or less targeted towards advertising companies and companies that might sell data about individuals and make money off of it, like Intellius or Spokio or those sort of services. But there's a variety of obligations in the actual law. Like one of them, for example, is that you put a button on your website that says "Do not sell my data," and you allow people to opt out of that. Other options are more GDPR specific rights where a user could request access to all their PII that the company has processed about them, which if you went through GDPR and you are giving those rights to individuals globally, like we are at Twilio, then it's not a huge lift. But if, for example, you haven't, then it's a lot of companies are scrambling to comply with that for California residents.
Because Robin works in data privacy every day, I ask her how concerned the rest of us should be about data and what companies can do internally to improve privacy measures. You know, you're entrenched in privacy. It's something that you work with every day. How concerned should people be with their privacy? Like people who aren't in tech, people who aren't dealing with data as their occupation?
You know, with the recent Facebook Cambridge Analytica issues, I don't think people fathomed that what would happen around, you know, doing a survey, a personality survey, and then them data mining all this information, to third parties. So I just don't know what's out there. I'm afraid I don't really use many social media sites. I don't post much publicly about myself because I guess I inherently just don't trust many companies with my data. So just think about really what you're putting out there and why, and this third party you're giving your information to when you are giving it away.
What is a no shenanigans approach to privacy, or do you want to perhaps mention anything else about binding corporate rules?
So Twilio has these values, which I personally really love. A lot of companies have values. I don't know if they talk about them in their day-to-day activities. One of them is no shenanigans. And what that really means is inherently, let's do the right things. The right thing for our end users and our customers. Like, you might be in a meeting and you could say, is that the right thing? Do we really want to do that? Is that the right thing to do for our customers? Or is that shenanigan? Does it not feel right? Another one we have is wear your customer shoes. So when we're building a product or thinking about something, we think about how to do the right thing for our customers. So having a good privacy program in place is good for our customers because when they use our tools and services, they realize okay, they really care about privacy. They want to do the right thing.
My next guest is Tomas Sander, the Data Protection Officer at Intertrust, a company that introduced digital rights management to protect music and video nearly 30 years ago and is now creating data processing platforms with privacy features. We do a deep dive into the GDPR and discuss where there has been progress in privacy over the last year and where there is still cause for concern. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary for the GDPR. How has privacy changed in the last year? Can you describe privacy pre-GDPR and post-GDPR?
Sure. So privacy, one of the main things that the GDPR has done is that it has an extraterritorial reach. So GDPR not only applies to European companies, but to companies worldwide if they provide goods and services to European citizens. Also, GDPR has huge fines for non-compliance, and that has contributed for it taken seriously by companies globally. And for example, many US companies had to comply and change their practices because of GDPR. So it's really made privacy a much more important issue for many organizations. And if previously, because of the data breaches, security has become a boardroom issue for many companies. Now also privacy has become a boardroom issue.
And do you think that GDPR has been effective? I mean, now that it's becoming more of a boardroom issue, or what are your thoughts on that?
Certainly, GDPR has been extremely effective in setting the privacy debate worldwide. So determining, what is being discussed and setting a very high bar for privacy. So GDPR has, although it's a regulation in Europe, it's been extremely effective through its global impact on organizations and on thinking of policymakers, what they want to do about privacy in their countries. So in that sense, yes, they have been effective. Another concrete area, GDPR has been concerned about data breaches, and there have been thousands of data breaches have been reported to the data protection authorities in Europe, and there it has also been effective. But the question is if it has a positive impact where it really matters, namely on the privacy of end users, on improving that privacy. And for example, for that, the jury is still out, because data behemoths such as Google and Facebook, who have been particularly, who the European regulators had in mind when they were making these regulations, they're right now collecting data from many, many different sources, aggregating it about users, and create detailed profiles for the purposes of selling advertising usually, so for profit. And this practice of taking all this different data, from location data to smart home data to the social media data and so on, and using them for sophisticated user profiling, that practice hasn't recognizably changed yet. And I've recently heard data protection commissioners speak at a privacy conference in Washington, and they believe that we're going to see some of these investigations conclude this summer. And hopefully then there'll be some enforcement, and some of the commissioners certainly believe that there will be fines.
Many of my listeners are aware of Cambridge Analytica, which involved an agency using data from Facebook to target people politically off of Facebook. I take the opportunity to ask Tomas about some of the negative effects data and lookalike modeling has had in other global regions as well. You're entrenched with privacy. You deal with privacy every day, data and privacy every day. People who aren't in tech, who aren't working at data companies, who don't know much about privacy, should they be concerned?
Absolutely. I think people should be deeply concerned about privacy. And this relates to what I said earlier, that we're understanding that protecting privacy is about many things that we value in society. So let me make this a little clearer. So first, today, more and more data about people are being collected. It's data about your web browsing, your searches, location data, the data you share on social media. There might be facial recognition from images, and also these days, IoT and smart home data that give people intimate insights into what's happening in your home. So now so more and more data are being collected, but secondly, also given machine learning and AI algorithms, it is possible to infer now many sensitive attributes about users from these data sets, even when the data sets are seemingly innocent. For example, you can predict sexual orientation from facial images. You can predict the upcoming onset of depression from social media data before the user, him or herself, may even know about it. More generally, you can predict personality characteristics, such as whether a person is introvert or extrovert, from the data on social media. So there is simply no way to hide from that. So you even sharing relatively innocent data allowed to make a lot of sensitive inferences. And yes, we should be very concerned about this, because this could really change the way how society works, and we could lose a lot of the freedoms and that we have enjoyed over centuries, really.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Like maybe give me a worst case scenario of what big tech companies could do with this much information?
Yes. So in this example that I currently gave, they're mostly about tech companies observing what you do and perhaps creating a user profile. A next step they could take is that they don't only observe what you do and predict what the next step is you're going to do, but they may try to manipulate and to influence what you do. And they would usually do that for profit motives. And that is certainly a major concern. So people may not even know, may not even realize that they're being influenced. There have been studies done at Facebook that, for example, showed that just simply changing a website a little bit may impact the percentage of users who turns up for an election. So you can make a lot of changes that, the tech companies are now just not observing what we do, but that they're actually influencing and shaping what we do. And that's of course a major concern, and it should be, because then it really becomes our individual freedom about, it really becomes about democracy.
Yeah, we have heard about people's personal data being used to target people politically in the United States. However, this also happened in Germany, I believe. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So in Germany, there is a far-right party which is called Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland. And they were able to use a Facebook feature that has been created for advertisers to help it achieve the best result in a federal election for any far-right wing party in Germany after World War II. And that was certainly fairly shocking to many Germans. So, and the feature that was being used here was a feature of lookalike audiences. So what happened was that Facebook helped this party to analyze the characteristics of the 300,000 users who had liked the Alternative for Germany, who had liked this party. And from these users, then it created a lookalike audience of another 300,000 users that were similar in characteristics to those who had already liked this party. And then they were specifically targeting ads to this group.
In the third lightning round, I speak to Katrina Dow, the CEO of Miko, a company building tools that powers consent for personal data. Katrina is very knowledgeable around the evolution of data, and she puts into perspective how the mobile device changed the parameters around privacy. What kind of data abuse is most concerning from a consumer standpoint, also from your standpoint as a technologist?
Look, I think the biggest challenge right now is that people just don't understand what goes on under the surface, yeah? You take a picture of your child in the park on Sunday and you upload it to a social media site, and you're not thinking, okay, this picture of my 5-year-old daughter and what she's doing and how she's moving may actually impact her credit rating in the future. Her ability to access a service. You do a DNA test and you want to explore the genealogy of your family, and you haven't read the fine print that says you're actually signing away the rights of that maybe for 2 or 3 generations in the future. And this isn't your child, this isn't your grandchild, this is maybe your great-grandchild, turns up at a medical facility one day and says, sorry, you can't be treated for this because your great-great-grandparent signed away the rights around your DNA. And these aren't kind of future things. This is not some sci-fi thing that's happening out there. These are the kinds of things that are happening right now. And people don't read the terms and conditions. People don't understand the consequences of something that I do right now that's digital and what it might impact sometime in the future. So I think the biggest challenge is, how do we get people digitally aware? How do we start to manage some of those potential downstream consequences? And how do we help people make more informed choice around the services they want to use, or argue for better rights in terms of those services so those consequences don't happen?
We know some of the players who may not be handling data well, they're in the news frequently. Is there anybody that is handling data well? Any industries that are at the forefront of trust and data privacy that you can think of industry-wise?
That's a really good question, and you're right. We know all of the names that are being called out every day. Look, I want to say there are, and probably in pockets, but I would say those pockets are in this whole emerging trust sector that ironically says we can't trust. We've had so many privacy breaches. The only way that we can do this is to take a completely different design philosophy.
Can you give us maybe some background information? How did privacy and digital trust change when we migrated from desktop onto mobile?
So I think one of the big things was stuff went under the bonnet. So we wanted this great UX experience, and so that meant a lot of stuff had to happen in the background. And I think, you know, this is probably one of the big challenges for a company like Facebook, is that when you looked in 2012 when they were doing their IPO, and in fact it's one of the reasons that I founded our company. You know, I was looking at the risks they were signaling to the market, and there were 4 things that jumped out at me. A concern around privacy, a concern around regulation, a concern around what would happen if customers became aware of the value of the data. But the other thing was they're in that process of moving from desktop to mobile. And therefore, a lot of what goes on had to become more opaque. It goes under the bonnet. And that's a great UX experience. There's all this stuff going on in the background.
Katrina and I continue the conversation about the UX, or the user experience of the mobile device, and how this complicates privacy for end users. She also discusses one of the principles of the GDPR, which is designing privacy into the applications or websites as the foundation of the design, rather than adding privacy as an afterthought. There are already a lot of privacy concerns with how companies collect and share data. This will only increase as we connect more machines and we use AI for applications. What is the future of data privacy? Like, fast forward 5 to 10 years from now, maybe talk about the worst case scenario and the best case scenario.
I love this question because I really do think there are very simple answers. So the worst case scenarios, we just keep going. Like, if we just keep going as we are right now, and without sounding Orwellian, we will actually see a generation of children born into digital slavery. If we don't actually change this, and don't course correct, that is absolutely where we're going. However, if we have the ability to hit pause and go, okay, this is not working at an architectural level, and every one of us has a digital twin. Everything we do right now is creating some kind of data. This podcast, this conversation, how this will be distributed, the fact that we're standing here together right now, the location, everything, there's this digital other around everything we're doing in the physical world. So we've spent the last, 100 years campaigning for physical rights, the right to vote, the right to take a bus, the right to be paid equally, the idea that privacy is a human right, the right to have access to food and shelter. So we've done all of these amazing things for our physical selves. We now need to start thinking about how we do that for our digital selves. And that is a significant change in the way we design. So we've redesigned society for physical rights. And what we have to do right now is redesign society for digital rights.
Do you think the GDPR, which introduces some level of control, do you think that it's effective, and why or why not?
It's early days. It's not working as intended right now. And in fact...
What's not working about it?
So I think the biggest problem right now is the UX level is just not working. And organizations that have been smart in terms of creating enormous amounts of friction are using that to their advantage. So it's that paradox. They're legally compliant, but they have created that compliance burden to be so overwhelming that I agree, or just anything to get this screen out of the way is driving the behaviour. So I think one of the problems, and I was actually speaking with one of the regulators about this yesterday, is how do we think about GDPR at the design level? So part of GDPR is privacy by design, but what we haven't seen is that surface to the UX level. And I think right now it's just so overwhelming for people to even work out what's the choice. What are they saying yes to? What are they saying no to? So I think the underlying components are there, and from a legal framework, now how do we move that to what we know is the everyday use case, which is how you interact with those frameworks.
Thank you for listening to Tech Lightning Rounds. Please support the production of this podcast by subscribing in iTunes and leaving a review.
This podcast was brought to you by Intertrust, the inventor of digital rights management. Intertrust's DRM solution, ExpressPlay, has strong privacy protections built in from the ground up. Go to intertrust.com for more information.